He never raised his voice. He paid the bills.
No problem.
He was a good man.
When the resentment happens, it's really hard to say things in a nice way. Women may come with something emotional. Men are trying to put it in a certain box or say, yes, this is valid or this is not valid.
Women have not been getting their needs met in a relationship.
Would you just leave my room and shut the door?
So why did she feel dead inside? And why did the marriage collapse anyway?
There's a lack of connection, and oftentimes it leads to lack of sex in the relationship.
You stopped having sex with me in the last year. I never cheated on you.
That wakes the guy up. Oh, maybe we should do something about this.
This episode is a surgical breakdown of the nice guy myth.
Men really like appreciation.
Thank you for taking care of me.
We say, thank you for working for 20 years, and thank you for our home, and thank you for our children. I was listening to some stats the other day. 50% of marriages are sexless. 70% of women filing for divorce these days.
If you're afraid to be honest, this one's for you.
One really specific question: how does the dad tell the kid? Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to a very special episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and we're here with not one, not two, but three wonderful guests. This is our first Roundtable episode. So we're going to be doing these monthly. If you've been tuning into the show for a while, you may have noticed that we're starting to have themes. So every month we'll have a different theme. There's going to be guest shows, there's solo shows by me, and then we're going to end every month with a roundtable. And you may notice and recognize some of these guests. So we're going to have returning experts coming on the show, as well as some of our men's therapy online therapists, so that we can highlight kind of the community and the services that we offer out there for individuals. So I'm really excited to do this. Our first topic is on divorce. So before we dive in, I want to hear a little bit from each of you. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the camera. So Shana, do you want to start?
Sure. I am Shana James. I'm a relationship and dating coach, and I tend to work a lot with men, and especially men who have gone through divorce or breakup, and helping them start over again and really see that even though it is an extremely challenging time, it's also one of the most amazing opportunities to get to know yourself again and have love that is real and, really meets you in this way or phase. It's so often people who stay in marriages, some people grow and some people just kind of tend to ride out life and not evolve. And I think divorce is one of the most amazing catalysts for that kind of evolution and to be loved for who you really are instead of who you thought you were when you were a lot younger. So I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. Welcome to the show. I know you talk also a lot about healthy sex and sexuality, so that'll be a very interesting topic. One of our questions down the line is about dating, again, after divorce, and also how to keep intimacy alive. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that. Tamra, longtime friend, longtime guest. I think you've been on, 3 or 4 of our episodes. Can you let the audience know who you are?
Yes. So Tamra Sattler. I am a therapist in Boulder. I have been focused on high-tech founders, scientists, sort of like the Boulder worried well. And I just changed my focus primarily to couples therapy. Let's see, I teach at Naropa. I went to CIS to get a PhD. And I guess what I'm finding is that to really know yourself, especially through divorce, it's so incredibly important. And I think, a lot of these men have been in relationships for 20 years, but building their careers for 20 years. And then all of a sudden, it's the time to discuss a relationship. So yes, know yourself, be yourself, embody yourself, I guess is my message.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show because I feel like you have the perfect combination of like you said, those high performing couples, right? Men and women, everything in between, as well as that spiritual slant, So I'm excited to hear, I think what a lot of guys are worried about is the financial piece, and what's going to do to their career and what's going to do to their life and their lifestyle and your children's lifestyle. So I know you've worked with a lot of those, wealthy, high performing couples. So I'm excited to hear your take on that. And then last but not least, we have Silvan. He's one of our men's therapy online therapists. So Silvan, let them know a little bit about you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Colorado. I do somatic psychotherapy, so basically helping people use movement in their body as a resource for their mind. Research that comes out every day, how healthy movement is for our mental health. And I'm also work with Mark with Men's Therapy Online as an individual therapist, but also running a divorce dad support group. And just around divorce, I'm a child of divorce myself. So it's cool to see how many more resources there are for people now that my parents didn't have, and how much more encouraged it is. Because what I've noticed in the divorce dads group is like they're really starved for support, So it's great to be able to offer that.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome to the show. I'm excited to get a chance to, interact with you in this format. And I think, being a child of divorce, that's such an angle that I think is not talked about as much. When people are getting divorced, they always wonder, hey, if I, roll out the tape, what's this look like, 10 to 15, 20 years down the line? How does it impact my children? So I think that's a really, really important angle to bring. So thank you, guests, for coming on the show. Before we dive in, just a quick thing to our listeners. This is a good opportunity to check out our video version, right? Because, people do sound different, so you're able to track who's talking, but we do a video version of the podcast. So it's on YouTube. It's on our website, menstherapy.online. So if you want to see what we look like, check that out. So let's start with the first question. So it's kind of a big picture question to start. So from the most recent census data, right, 41% of first marriages end in divorce. So that's actually going down, funnily enough. I think when I was growing up, the often quote stat was over 50%, but we're at 41 now. So there was something going well there. But I'm curious for each of you, what are some of the most common psychological or emotional patterns that you see that lead to divorce, right? So start by what lead to divorce that is, contributing to that 41%.
I think but if you really baseline, it's like lack of connection. So, and there's a lot of things that can lead to that and a lot of ways that can manifest. But I think on the underlying, it's mostly what I notice is people don't feel connected to each other.
I have to piggyback on that. So what I'm seeing is lack of connection with self, inner landscape, and then therefore also lack of connection with partner, and kind of not cultivating, like if you think of a relationship as a garden, taking your attention away from the garden and just expecting the garden to be there after you have kids, a successful career, and everything. So yes.
Yeah, I would say the same. And the way I think of it is most of us never learned how to do relationships, right? It wasn't part of our education, and most of us didn't learn how to have emotions or have desires or needs and then bring other people into the mix. And so I see people either shut down and say like, well, I don't even know what I want, I don't have any needs, and then feel that kind of resentment or disappointment in their partnerships and not know how to talk about it in a way where they're asking for what they want, or the patterns of conflict and arguments and not knowing how to navigate differences in a way that they stay connected, which often then, leads, of course, to like a sex life that isn't happening because nobody really wants to have sex with someone they're feeling resentful toward and frustrated by. And so, yeah, there's so much in there, but I think I would agree with both of you that lack of connection. And with men, often men come to me saying, I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I was the provider and that was what I was taught. And yet a lot of partners these days are thinking like, okay, I want a provider, but I also want a best friend and an emotional connection and a lover and all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good things that you're saying in there. I want to open that up to the roundtable. I think starting with intimacy. I think you mentioned, Shana, sexual intimacy. With the guys I work with, that's often the first thing that they say, I think one of you brought up also the idea of needs. And I think as men, we don't know many needs beyond the sexual need. And that's obviously wrong. We have more needs than the sexual. But like, let's start with the intimacy piece. And maybe more taboo question of, do you feel like a lack of sexual intimacy is a precursor for divorce? Do you find those are correlated?
I mean, I would say so. I'm curious what you all have to say, but I think if that kind of intimacy isn't happening, then oftentimes people are like, what's the point of this? Or looking elsewhere. Like you said, it's not just about sex, but it is about being affirmed, being wanted, being right, being loved, being known, all of those things that I think men tend to look to sex for. They can happen in other emotional ways and quality time and things, but if those aren't happening, and I often, as I think about, I'm going through the perimenopausal years, and so my body's getting even more sensitive, and it's like there's a lot more conversation and navigating, and I think if I see often that at this age, relationships start to break down where women can be like, if it's a heterosexual relationship, women can be like, fuck this. Like, I'm no longer going to deal with touch that doesn't feel attuned to me, or where we're not feeling emotionally connected. And I think I often see this, and I don't think it's gendered, but I often see this, that men start to get that after divorce. It's like, oh, there's this opportunity to have a whole different kind of intimacy, but sometimes there's the wake up call can be the divorce.
Yeah, there's so much to say about this. So I was listening to some stats the other day. I'm sorry, I can't quote, but 50% of sexless marriages, that's having sex less than 4 times a year, and then 70% of women filing for divorce these days. So a little bit kind of adding on to Shana, what I'm seeing is, one, I'll see some extramarital affairs, which that's highlighted immediately to me. And another thing is, let's see, I had another thought. Just a lot of resentment from women in the couples. So super willing men. Lately I've been secretly siding a lot with men. So willing, as if they sort of just woke up, no sex, and the women are extremely resentful, really disconnected, and so that's sort of where we're entering.
Yeah, I'm similar with me right now, Tamra. It seems like a lot of the people I'm working with right now, the women have not been getting their needs met in the relationship, and then there's that lack of connection, and oftentimes it leads to lack of sex in the relationship, and that kind of wakes the guy up, and it's like, oh, well, maybe we should do something about this. But at that point, the woman has already been, I guess, oftentimes not telling the man what's going on with them, and maybe they don't know really either, but there's been a lack of connection for a long time, and then not having sex, then the guy actually starts to realize it more. And I also just wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, Shana, around this piece of, like, for men, it's oftentimes like what they feel like they're lacking in the relationship is the sex, but they don't realize that sex provides for them all these different layers of connection. And they're just not aware of all those layers of the connection that they're missing that are more than just the act of sex. And usually that comes along with it. Like, the couples aren't cuddling on the couch and things like that either.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, that it is often like a symptom of a much deeper issue, and certainly a long-standing issue. What I'm hearing from each of you and what I see in my work too is that, the relationship can be atrophying for sometimes over a decade before it does often take like that lack of sexual intimacy for the guy to be like, oh, what is going on? And Tamra, that quote that you mentioned, I don't know the exact number either, but we learned about it I was at this Big Tent Summit, this like men's work thing, and they talked about how most divorces are initiated by women now, which is totally different than it has been in the past decade. So, on the note of how do you prevent a divorce? You know, I had a wonderful guest on the show, Matthew Frey. He writes a book called "This Is How Your Marriage Ends," which is my current obsession for my divorced dudes, and talks essentially about how, you know, again, in heterosexual relationships, men often invalidate women's everything, right? Their feelings, their concern, their worries, their fears, their hopes, their dreams. Like there's this constant pattern that happens where a woman will come to the man and say, "Hey, I have this thing," and the guy will either say, "This is real or not real," right? This is like legitimate or not legitimate. And what he highlights is like that is basically the thing that leads to those disconnections and divorce. But I'm curious from each of you, I guess, one, do you see that in the work that you do? Or two, what are some of those patterns that, you know, over time lead to a divorce or lead to a sexless marriage or lead to the dissolution of a relationship?
I like what you were saying, Tamra, where, you know, oftentimes you can feel yourself siding with the men because I think women can get so sharp and mean and you know, that when the resentment happens, it's really hard to contain that or to say things in a nice way. Yeah, but it's, I don't know, it's such a fascinating thing to see. I love what you're saying, Mark, because I don't think it's intentional invalidation, right? It's like, I think it's just, we often are taught to go for like, this is right, or this is wrong, or this is effective, or this is not. It's very, we're raised, I think, especially men, very intellectual, and women tend, again, it doesn't have to be gendered, but you know, there tends to be this emotional side to us that I think men have too, but it's often under the surface more because you haven't been, you know, it hasn't been made okay. So then I think women may come with something emotional in this case. Men then, you know, are trying to put it in a certain box or say, yes, this is valid or this is not valid, as opposed to learning, okay, how do we be in this together? How do we really listen to each other and understand each other and feel deeply known and appreciated by each other? Like that always struck me about my parents. They're fighting about the garbage. They're fighting about who does this, who does that. And I'm like, oh my God, they're feeling not supported, not appreciated, not known, right? And with all of those, like, yeah, sex is just that concrete way that you can actually start to see the dynamics that are playing out in these more invisible emotional ways.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, this we're talking about it from one standpoint, but I think also, and it's often that way, the dynamic, the genders, but I also see it the other way. Like Mark and I work with a guy, like a lot of guys that maybe we call it like kind of nice guy syndrome, which is similar, I think, to what we're talking about with a lot of women and how that comes to divorce, is that there's a sense of like, you maybe not even sure what your needs are. And if you are, when you do, and it seems like when women get in touch with what their needs are, then they're like, oh, they're not getting met, and now I want a divorce, or like, I'm not going to give you what you need because I'm not getting what I need. But I think like the nice guys that we work with have a similar thing. And that's been my pattern in my life, kind of like nice guy, and been able to working with letting myself get angry and then like using that power to kind of like do something about my life, not to push the anger out on somebody else, but just to kind of get energized to get what I want in my life and ask myself what I want, and then be able to ask my partner for something. And I think that piece happens kind of what we're talking about. It happens in reverse with men that are nice guys. You know, they tend to be really nice and like they don't want their partner to leave, so they're just going to do everything they can to be nice, but they don't talk about their needs. And in that sense, the woman's not met either, because they're not connected emotionally, because they don't know what their partner's emotional needs are. And then it kind of spirals from there. But that the resentment that you mentioned, Shana, is what made me think about that, because nice guys often get resentful, right? Especially if there's not sex happening anymore. Then they're like, what's putting all this energy into, you know, I give her everything she wants, and like now we're not even having sex. Like, but actually she wants to know how you're feeling and what's real for you and what you really want, oftentimes. And so that's the kind of layer of unpacking that often happens.
I guess I'm listening to you, Bob. It almost feels like a wake up call, almost like a if you will, a spiritual emergency, just putting in the word spiritual, where I have to go backwards. I'm thinking of couples right now, less about individual men, where it's like, okay, can we pause and really kind of almost like start over, really get to know your partner, have the chills in a new way, deepen in yourself in a new way. And I always suggest that each a couple that's actually on the brink of divorce, are you both seeing your own therapists? Because couples, we can't get too deep. We could get deep, but it's a lot of strategy also, and it's a lot of unearthing. But it just seems like such a beautiful deepening path. And my couples joke with me, I have not had a divorce yet in my room. I mean, I haven't had a ton of couples yet, but we there's a lot of humor that we bring in. But yeah, it's almost like, it's really like almost starting over with themselves and with the container and the pair, while, children are in the waiting room and all kinds of other stuff is happening, extended family, health issues. Yes, I'm going to call it a spiritual path, a deep one.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Yeah, I really like what you're saying there, Tamra, and I'm hearing it in both, Silvan and Shana, what you're saying too, is like this idea of needs, right? And I think men not being conditioned to know our needs, let alone express them in a healthy way. I think many men, like you're saying, Silvan, like either just put them all away and become nice guys, or they become that kind of macho jerk and use anger and dominance to get their needs met, both of which are equally ineffective and shitty, So it makes me wonder, right? Like, I guess what needs do need to be met in a relationship from a male perspective? What needs that you can maybe help some of our male listeners put language and voice to prevent a divorce, to really try to cheer up those things. And Tamra, I like what you're saying, that like it is a rediscovering. Because what I see with a lot of my, people that are going through divorce, they're often, in their 40s, early 50s, and they've been put in these boxes. They're just doing the mom and dad game where they're, they're doing the stuff. They're often successful. They're financially fine, and they're just, shuttling the kid from practice to practice. They are, showing up at the school functions, but there's no relationship, right? The marriage is almost completely empty. And they will often say, I hear from a lot of my guys, like, yeah, we're just business partners, or we're just co-parents, or we're just roommates, right? I hear that over and over again as the relationship itself has broken down. So very long-winded way of asking you all, what are some needs that you think men should start to pay attention to in a relationship and start to ask for?
I just wanted to say, so studying relationship theory for a long time, men really like appreciation. I don't know if you all would agree, but can we appreciate them more? Can we appreciate the little things? Can we say, thank you for working for 20 years and making all of this money, and thank you for our home, and thank you for our children, and thank you for going to the store today, and then so that for sure appreciation goes a long way. And then can you give your man an idea of what you really need? Like when you interrupt a business meeting, what do you really need? Do you need him to come home right away, or did you just need him to step aside and hear you? So we do a lot of kind of role play. So in my couples, at least right now, he really wants to satisfy you. He's going to put it all on the line. This is not everyone, but this is a lot of wealthy, bolder couples. He wants to please you. Can you give him a little idea of how to please you?
God, so interesting. I love that. My appreciation was the first thing that I thought too. And I often teach people like that there's a opposite side of the coin, right? There's complaint and desire. And it's so much easier. And right, anytime there's a complaint, there's a desire, but it's so much easier and less vulnerable to complain at each other versus to say, hey, this is what I'm really wanting. Would you be willing to do this? Or would you be willing to appreciate me? Or right. And then that's where I feel like in the work that we all do, going back to support people to find that sense of sovereignty and innate goodness that when somebody doesn't give us what we need, instead of saying, fuck you, now I'm not going to give it to you because you're not giving it to me, we can be like, hey, I'm feeling drained, or I'm not really, feeling appreciated. Would you be willing to, say a couple things that you are appreciating about me? So I think appreciation feels like such a big one. And then that sense of like, having each other's back. I have a partner now. So I was divorced maybe 12 years ago, and I have a partner now who I feel more supported and loved and cared for than I ever have. And, it has me, especially, I'll just be vulnerable and say, like, in the perimenopausal time where my sexual desire is like up and down. And, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I don't even know. Maybe I never want to have sex again, but it has me willing to be like, okay, let's check this out together. Let's explore together. Let's be, let's create dates together where even if there's not something spontaneous happening, we can see like, where could we go and how could we feel connected and intimate? And it's been mind-blowing and amazing. And I think about that kind of communication that's needed to make that happen, where we can ask for our needs or our desires or our fantasies. And then something you were saying, Tamra, that sense of like, or right, the appreciation, and also can we get to know each other anew, right? Can we sort of start over and be like, okay, if we were dating, I would be asking you questions about, well, what do you like? And is this good or is that good? And, how do you want to, I love the question, like, how could I love you better? Just these really simple questions of how could I care for you this week? Or, breaking it down into these smaller chunks instead of thinking we've got to revolutionize or, create this whole new relationship. Like, can we have these simple ways to get to know each other and appreciate each other, and then make requests from there?
Yeah, the simple ways is really resonating with me right now in my life, because we have an infant in the household, and like all the energy goes there, and it's it's simple, but not easy, right? Because there's all just going towards the baby. So this conscious work of like coming back to like what are simple and sometimes very brief ways we can connect with each other. I definitely resonate with the appreciation. I think the mother of my baby really resonates with that too, especially with all the work she's doing to bring this child into the world and to keep it alive. So the appreciation, but also I think physical touch is important, especially for a lot of men. I think, there's some weird kind of cultural thing a lot in America where there's this piece of like, oh, we just get our physical connection needs met through sex. And if you're touchy-feely guy, then you're somehow weak or something. But actually, I think this, going back to the nice guy thing, it's like, if you actually know that about yourself, that, some of your needs are physical beyond sex, that you like hugs, you like a kiss when you come in from the door at work at night, to connect with your partner. And you can ask for that, then there's this sense of empowerment there, and it doesn't feel weak to me at all. It feels strong, and it feels like it keeps a strength in the family unit, to be able to maintain that physical connection, if that's something that you want in the relationship. And for me, it's been a lot of like, okay, my partner's over there like nursing the baby in the fancy, glider rocking chair or whatever. I'm over on the couch doing my thing, and I'm like, oh, we don't have that much time. Baby's not sleeping well, so in the evenings it's like just taking turns getting the baby to sleep, and by that time we're ready to go to sleep too. So little things like, okay, I'm gonna sit in the easy chair, the rocking chair, and they can sit in my lap, and do the nursing thing, or like they could come sit with me on the couch, and we can have like a big cuddle puddle, and so that kind of stuff of like, traditionally, it's not like what you see in is, from the 60s or 50s, I'm sitting in the chair and everybody's got their own chair and doing this thing, watching TV or whatever. It's like, can we kind of come together, these simple moments of connection? I think they go a long way.
Well, so I have a super healthy couple right now. And I'm like, are you sure you two should be here? They touch the entire time with hands, arms, legs. And I'm like, okay, you get one more time here. That's all. We're good. And they're like, okay, well, maybe one extra one just to fine tune. But thank you for saying that, Sylvan. Sometimes I have a lot of neurodivergent clients, so touch sometimes is a little bit of an edge. But yeah, I appreciate that.
I was just gonna say, like every man, and now I'm realizing since I was divorced that I've dated in every decade of my life, every man I've been with, touch has been really important to him. And there is a way, even in my current relationship, I'm like, oh, are there ways that I, as we're having this conversation, that I could be initiating that more? Or I think just to stay in that curiosity for ourselves and to be willing to be generous with our partners when it's like, yeah, I'm tired. I may not feel like it. I may not feel like rubbing your shoulders or holding your hand, but and not to say like you should go against, your own internal, like, I don't want to do this. You should cross your own boundaries, but maybe also to soften a little bit into what could be a win-win right here. Or if I don't want to do it now, but I know my partner would like some touch, when would be a good time? And I think I have taken on the perspective that if I want to be in a relationship, I have to not just think about my own needs and what I want. I have to take my partner into consideration and be, I think generous is a good word for it. Like if I want someone to be generous with me, then making sure that I'm actually generous as well.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's part of a relationship. It's like doing things you don't want to do sometimes, on both ends, on every side of the table, and being able and trying to like learn that other person, learning what their needs are and learning how to attune with them. So, yeah, so we've talked a lot about, what leads to divorce. We've talked about what happens where you can kind of try to prevent it. But let's say divorce has happened. We're here, we're at the moment, papers have been served. I think the ideal for many people is to have that amicable divorce, something where it doesn't get nasty, doesn't get dragged out in court. There's not massive custody battles, but it doesn't always go that way. I think a lot of them do end up becoming quite nuclear in many ways. So I'm curious, from each of your experiences, like, what are some tips or patterns or strategies when the divorce is there, right? Where there is no turning back and you're on that precipice of that major, major change?
I could just start with having been divorced myself, that it was a huge, I'll call it a spiritual practice, right? Or a growth practice of still being willing to see the best, or still being willing to see the positive intentions. And this, if it gets really, really gnarly and someone is being attacked and blamed and shamed and whatever, like, I'm not saying that this always works, but I did a lot of trying to acknowledge his side, even when I had a very different perspective and a very different opinion. And, we almost got to the point where we needed to go to court. And then I just remember, like, I prayed a lot and I asked myself a lot of questions, and I always tried to answer every email or every exchange with like, okay, I can see your perspective, or I can see why you would see it that way. And here's what I'm seeing, and how can we come together in this, right? So again, I think it took a lot of maturing of my perspective to see that it's not that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. Even in couples, I'm curious what you all think, but even in couples where someone has cheated or had an affair, if you really look, there's often, when you get down to the underbelly of it, it's like, oh, we weren't connecting, we weren't understanding each other, we weren't, meeting each other's needs or trying. So it's always more complicated than it looks on the surface.
I think the big thing for me is just accept it. If it's happening, if there's like, I think there's a lot of guys that I work with that they're not able to totally accept it. And you can't move beyond it if you can't accept it. And it's so clear. It's even logically clear to them that it's completely over. But there's parts of them that are really having a hard time accepting it. So I think, and part of that acceptance is letting yourself feel the grief, you know, you may be, it's probably the person you were most closest to in your life ever. And then to let yourself feel some of that grief. Yeah, we all have grief, and even if we haven't had divorce, we have a sense of what grief is about. And then divorce is like a huge grieving process. So being able to accept it, grieve it, and then you can actually start to move on to the rest of your life.
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot with one of my male clients. They went to couples therapy, so I think that's an excellent start to try, to, like Shana's saying, try to get some connection. But it is the worst divorce I've ever witnessed, heard of. I mean, 50 legal cases, international custody, you name it. He has lost contact with his son right now. So what we're, I hope I'm not giving away too much, but what we're working on with him is, with all of this madness and with some deep, deep sadness on both sides, how can we really allow his life to go on? He's had some health issues. How can we really help him grieve, but also forgive himself, forgive his ex, start anew? It is, it has been, I feel like we've visited hell, like the hell realm. So, but I think couples therapy is a good first shot, and they did Gottman theory, which, I would have liked a little bit more opening, a little bit more transpersonal, I think, but that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a point that I see with a lot of the guys that, finally, come to men's therapy online, is that it's not just the divorce. It is maybe, you're talking about self and that lack of acceptance or lack of processing grief, where they start to spiral. They start drinking too much, or maybe they start being negligent at their job and they get fired. Many men, especially in, heteronormative relationships, like the female is often the social planner. So they lose all their friends. They often don't have many friends of their own, or they have college buddies that are kind of scattered, across the country or the world. Maybe they say or do something, they have a big fight, or they break something, and maybe there's a legal case, out there, or maybe they, had an affair, right? It's like this constant kind of spiraling. And by the time they end up in therapy, it's often, they're at a rock bottom. I think many men, unfortunately, don't come to therapy until they've run out of all their options. So that being said, I'm curious from each of your perspectives, how do you stop that spiraling? Or, another angle to look at this question would be, how do you pick up the pieces after there's been that spiral and you have to rebuild from that wreckage? What would you recommend that, some practical things that some of our listeners or people that are experiencing divorce might want to try to start to rebuild their lives post-divorce?
I feel like I keep jumping in. Yeah, you go, Silvan. There you go. Go ahead.
I feel like there's the nice guy syndrome, but there's a nice woman syndrome too. That I think is what we're talking about. A little bit of, women are not saying what their needs are, and then they get resentful. And it's interesting, the dynamic of the podcast too. Like I noticed, maybe it's just in my head, right? But it seems like I always am I'm ready to jump right in. And I feel like if I did that, then the women on the podcast would not have as much space to talk. And so I kind of notice that and see if I can hold back. But I'm wondering if you're doing the same thing, Shana.
Totally. Yes.
Great.
I noticed the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of nice therapists here. Sorry, I lost the thread again. But go ahead, Shana.
The question was about rebuilding after divorce, after there's been a spiral, maybe drinking too much, losing friends, isolation, losing a job. How do you rebuild from the ashes?
So I think support, and a lot of guys, not only guys, but I think women sometimes fall in this category, but mostly men, I think, are, we don't have much emotional support. And our main emotional support person, sometimes the only one, unfortunately, for a lot of guys, is their partner, is their wife. And if that ends, then they're just kind of drifting in the wind, right? So reaching out for support, like for men, like men's groups, therapy, connection with old friends that maybe has kind of lapsed because of, you're so focused on work and marriage, especially if you're putting a lot of work into the marriage and it's not working out, kids, finances, all that stuff, kind of coming back to old friendships can be really helpful. Like for me with right now, I'm just like, we're so busy with the baby and everything. It's like, okay, I'm going to at least go to my mountain bike meetup group once a week, and my partner's going to at least like go to a dance class once a week, support each other to have those connections outside of the family so that there's not so much pressure on the individual relationship. And I wonder, Tamra, the couple that's always super touchy-feely, if maybe there's a little too much of like dependence on each other and they want to it would be healthy for them to kind of branch out a little more, get some of their needs met socially and emotionally from other people as well.
That's an interesting take. I've only seen them twice, but they'll be back. So that's an interesting. I kind of dove into what they came in with, the one objective that they had, but haven't really kind of gotten an idea if they're like, but some people get too enmeshed, some people get too, codependent. I wanted to say that, gosh, I'm thinking of one client. We just dove in. So before his divorce, during his divorce, we did a full life review. It happens to be a, very prominent, successful person. So I think that was really important to him. Does he want to go on and do a new project? What is, let's start from birth and go through. And then, yes, where is he? Can he connect to old friends, old universities? Can he go back to his passion sports? It was books. What are the books that he kind of sees this as, his spiritual journey. But I feel like we excavated pretty much everything. And thankfully, he's with a new person right now, which is like unbelievable. Well, I really think he found out, he landed enough in himself that I think he was able to pick a really good partner. We'll still see. So I think just everything, unearthing the full pie chart.
I love the unearthing and the story of your life and, who did you become, and did you become that because of your expectations in the family, the culture, the religion, the whatever, or, is this who you whose life have you been living? Are you living your life? If you were living your life, what would it really look like, right? So since you both spoke to the external, I think then just that internal piece of, I often work with clearing out or getting in touch with some of the shame or the, I often work with nice guys around, is it okay to have desires? Does that make me selfish? Does that make me, right? So being able to find one's own, again, steady, self-loving place where it's like, okay, from here, what do I actually want? What do I actually need? How do I actually communicate that to the new people I am now meeting so that we can start relationships, whether they're platonic or romantic, with this foundation of this is actually what feels good. This is what actually feeds me, instead of, a lot of people have relationships out there where it's like, oh, I'll go hang out with my friend, but then I come home and I'm drained and I don't feel like I've been understood and I don't feel like I've been supported. And that kind of life doesn't feel very nourishing. And so knowing that we all deserve to have that, and then figuring out okay, where do I need to sit in myself so that I can actually ask for these things, or say to another man, hey, I want to have a deeper conversation. That is really vulnerable. But when we have that sense of sovereignty within ourselves, that if someone was like, oh, that's dumb, or why do you want to do that, that we could be like, oh, okay, that's their limitation. There's nothing wrong with me. Then we can create the life we really want from there.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
So on this topic of rebuilding, one of the biggest topics is kids, right? And I'm curious, I guess one really specific question, then one general question. The big specific question that I'm really curious also for my own practice of me working with guys is like, how does the divorcee, we'll say divorced dad in this case, tell the kid? Because I see that as a major obstacle. I can be looking at a relationship and it's like, it's dead. It's going down the tubes and they're keeping it together for the child. And I think a lot of it is they're afraid or don't know how, or are afraid of ruining their relationship with their children. So the very specific question is, how do you tell the kid? How do you tell the kid? And I'm sure it's different, for different age ranges. You can dive into that. And then the next question is, the more general one, is how do you rebuild a relationship with your child post-divorce? Knowing that there is likely a joint custody situation, you may be sharing time, you may be living in, the kid may be living in two different homes. So, how do you talk to the child? And then what does the recovery look like after the divorce?
Like there's so much I could say on this one too, and having a kid and having gone through divorce. I've actually seen, I think my ex or my kid's dad probably spends way more time and is way more emotionally connected to our kid because of it. Because I think I would have been doing more of that emotional labor, and so actually knowing that it can be a really amazing opportunity to create a deeper bond with your kid. And I think part of that is being willing to hear from the kid, hey, this is hard. And if they're acting out, to not see it as, why are you doing this to me? And why are you making my life harder? But like, oh, okay, they're struggling, and there's a way that together we can get through this, and together we can have these conversations that have our relationship stronger. And I did, when I was going through my divorce, I did the research to see that yes, it's best to have two parents in a household harmoniously, but next best is harmonious separate houses, right? Like, and under that is the conflict in the same house. And so recognizing, okay, if I can show my kid an amazing example. We just took a family trip with my current partner, my kid's dad, my kid, and some other friends. And like, if we can show the example that, hey, yes, we're not together anymore, but we can still work to get along, and it may not always be easy, but we have acceptance for each other, and I want the best for him and he wants the best for me. And I think the more you can get to that, then the better that the kids get to see, okay, divorce can happen, but it doesn't have to break things apart. It can actually create new family and new chosen family and all of those things.
I think the biggest thing for me around this is, like, I used to work in an elementary school as a therapist, and the biggest thing I saw with kids whose parents were getting divorced, and I see it, my individual adult clients now too, is I can't emphasize this enough, and it makes me emotional to think about it, talk about it, because I saw how it wrecked kids. So, regardless of gender or any of that stuff, like, do not badmouth the other person. Because when you do that, then you make the kids choose sides, and then they lose one of their parents on some level, and it just puts the kids through hell. So That's my biggest advice for anybody in divorce with kids. Don't make them choose sides. You can have all your feelings. You can hate, the person you were with. Bring it to your friends, outside of the house, away from your kids. Don't even say that stuff on the phone when you think they're not listening, because they are. So, really, really check yourself and bring the frustration, the anger, the pain about the relationship to other adults. Not to your kids. Don't let them hear that stuff.
So my parents did not do this well. My whole scene that I've played out in therapy for 40 years at least is my dad walking out and me being like holding onto his ankle as he left. So that didn't work well. I don't know the correct way. I'm hoping both parents, depending on the age. But what I see with a lot of my men, including my male friends, which I love, which my dad really, it was Dad's Day yesterday, as everyone knows. I really love men who prioritize their children, who really make time, even separately and together. We were going over memories with my dad on the phone with my sibling, and it was just like so nourishing. And so can you keep that relationship going, put time in. I think my dads are doing great at this. Travel with their sons, maybe or daughters with, a passion trip, or just like really nice home time. So I'm just big on that.
On the topic of rebuilding, another big question I get, and Shana, I'm interested really in your take on this as well, is like, when am I ready to date again? I think that's the specific question here. Is like, how do you know when you're ready? How do you know when you've healed enough, right? I think there's this kind of magical, checkpoint men are hoping to reach. And then how do you navigate that differently to make sure that you don't end up in the same situation, 10 years down the line?
I love this. I feel like we could talk about this for, days and
a
days.
whole other roundtable in of itself.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would just say on the ready topic, for me, there are different levels or stages or readiness, whatever. It's like, to me, as long as you are being honest about what you're doing with yourself and others, then you can really do whatever you want, right? If you're I'm ready for some physical intimacy, or I'm ready for some adventures with people, but I'm not ready for a long-term relationship, you can communicate that and say that and look for other people who are ready for the same thing. And then when you're ready for a little bit more, right? After my divorce, I knew I didn't want a long-term relationship again. I knew I was still working on the part where I was trying not to lose myself, trying to figure out what were my needs and desires and being able to communicate them. But I also then realized I couldn't practice that unless I was dating or had relationships, even if they weren't going to be long-term partnerships. So I think the communication piece is key, and being honest, and again, the generosity of knowing, okay, if I really like someone, but that person is really looking for long-term partnership and babies and all the things I know I'm not ready for, to make sure that I'm having that conversation and really taking care of them by saying, okay, I might want this to happen, but I see where you are in your life. I'm going to let you go do your thing. I'm going to, find someone else to play with over here. And the starting over, I think, being honest and more vulnerable and being able to say, here's what I know I'm capable of. Here's where I'm still growing and struggling, that we can start dating with those conversations instead of the fantasy of the white picket fence and this is what it looks like and this is all of that. To me, that's been so relieving. And I think for many of the men I've worked with, to really get, if I start having these conversations and a woman is not up for that kind of honest, authentic relating, and if that's what I really want, then this isn't going to be the relationship that I'm going to invest in.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick and highlight something you're saying that I say to a lot of my guys, and I think it's like a shitty, harsh truth for a lot of men, is like, you got to work out these issues relationally. I'm hearing you really say that, Shana, where it's like, you can't just do it in a microcosm, even in therapy, right? And just like think your way into being a perfect partner. And I think especially, Silvan, I'm sure you'll talk more about this, but with the nice guys, where you want to have like the answer, you want to have the complete algorithm to never get hurt again, basically. And it's like, you got to do it relationally, and you got to mess it up. You got to, rupture and repair. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's imperfect by nature.
It is. And I think that's one of the things I actually do with men is I call it human practice, where we get to have some of those conversations, or like practicing things out loud, or practice speaking, something sexual that you want, like all those things that there is, you can practice with coaches, you can practice with therapists, you can practice with your friends. And eventually, right, you've got to be willing to make some messes and know how to repair or clean things up.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things about going through divorce is, like, especially if you're nice guys, like, and you're doing the work, right? You're in therapy, you're getting support from ideally from other men as well. You kind of start to know what your needs are. And then you're like, oh, actually, I wasn't that happy in that marriage either, And actually, I want more than what I was getting in that marriage too, even though it was ended, the woman was the one that ended the marriage, And then it's like this whole new world, And if you have a sense of like what you want, then you go out in the world, you know what you want, you're going to kind of connect with those people much more easily than if you're out there just kind of dangling like, I just want somebody, I just want somebody to recognize me, to validate me, to connect with me. Similarly, right? If the guy is like, was kind of like the other opposite end of the spectrum, and he was just always like worried about his needs getting met and wasn't really so worried about his wife's needs being met, and there was divorce. If he can start to recognize like, oh, what are women's needs, And if I'm in a relationship, what are that person's needs? Can I ask them what their needs are? Then they can start to have a relationship that's more back and forth, that feels ultimately more fulfilling for both of them, because then the guy's able to. It feels really good to be able to ask somebody what their needs are, and then be able to meet some of those needs for someone.
Apparently research says 2 years after divorce, but sometimes divorce or separation happens at different times. So I have been a serial dater, never married, and the dating apps, most men aren't ready. So men, get a therapist, life coach, guy friend who's been through some stuff, do something, and just be honest. There's apps for playing around and having sex. There's apps for, more, just tell people what you're looking for. Wow. So, yes, So, and I feel for them. But when they come out of a 20-year marriage with no therapy and try to date, that's, and they had their divorce 6 months ago. So ask for help, that's what we're here for. Yeah, it's a wild world out there. And then a lot of women wait, which is, good. They work on themselves, maybe they'll never get married again. But guys seem to be a little eager to get back out there. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, and I think that 2 years, I'm going to push back against that 2 years thing, because that's maybe this statistic, right? But I think it's because people aren't willing to do that deeper work, right? If you're able to do the deeper work, feel the grief, help let that move, right? And then bring in some appreciation for yourself. And that has to do often with community, right? People being able to reflect to us, what things are valuable that we have to offer, but also being able to reflect on that for ourselves. Then I think it can be, it's possible to be ready in 6 months to start dating again, if you're really doing the work.
I would think so.
Yeah.
So as we're winding down our roundtable here, I've loved the conversation so far, and I feel like we could definitely keep going. But I'm curious from each of you, do you have a last word, maybe a last word for those, men that are going through divorce out there or that are on their precipice, something that they can take with them as kind of a nugget of wisdom if they've listened to this episode?
Well, I guess I would just like to say, once again, know yourself and ask for what you want or script what you want. It's okay. It's okay if you never want to get married again, have lots of, sex for a while. It's just okay. Just get to know yourself and ask for what you want. As simple as that sounds.
So I think one of the big thing is if you have kids, and there's this piece, I think it doesn't matter what your gender is or anything. There's this real, ingrained thing of like, oh, we're going to stay together for the kids. I'm staying together for the kids. And my thing is like, if you're not happy, especially if you're both not that happy, right? Oftentimes if the guy's not asking for the divorce, he doesn't realize how unhappy he is in the marriage. But if you're not happy, how wonderful would it be for your kids to have a parent, ideally both parents, whether they're married or not, that are really self-empowered, that really know what they want, and they're out in the world trying to get it. Yeah. And also, if you're not happy in your marriage, the kids are picking up on that, and they're not going to be as happy either. So, like from my experience growing up, my parents were arguing a lot, fighting a lot, and it was really difficult. The divorce was really difficult. My brother was really young, and he kind of internalized a lot of it. My parents weren't aware enough to get him therapy when he was young. I think especially when the kids are really young, they don't understand what's going on. It's really helpful to get them into some therapy, some play therapy ideally, because kids don't have the words to process things, so they can just play and work things out. But so it's difficult for kids, but when you come out the other end, like, I'm so glad my parents didn't stay married, because it was pretty brutal to be around the fighting. Even if you can keep the fighting away from the kids, they're picking up on the energy that's in the room, and they're not seeing their parents cuddling on the couch like most parents do, or they're not seeing them connect really on an emotional or intellectual level together that is important for kids to see couples do.
I will add the piece around context. Like, if you can actually see or ask yourself the question, how do I make this an opportunity to create a love life, a life for my children, myself, even for my ex, that I feel excited about and proud of, and, that's in integrity, and maybe even more in integrity than I had in the past. Like, how can I keep growing and evolving through this? That can be a very, a context that can guide or hold this experience. Or, otherwise the story is like, ugh, why is this happening to me? How awful is this? And then we go down, I think, that downward spiral. So if we can contextualize or have that sense of, how can this be a part of my growth? How can I even maybe be grateful someday that this happened? How can I create a relationship where I am loved in ways I couldn't even imagine before, and where I get to love someone in ways that they couldn't have even imagined? I think then, we engage differently in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's all really well said from all of you. I'm hearing a lot of hope. I think divorce, it is that rock bottom moment for a lot of people, men and women, everything in between. But there is a chance to heal. And what I think I'm hearing from all of you is like, become who you really are, right? Like, shed those masks, just, get rid of that white picket fence, fantasy, and have that new canvas. So as we're wrapping up here, where can people learn more about you online? Where can they work with you if they were inspired by the way that you were talking? Silvan, we will start with you.
So my website's Natural Movement Psychotherapy.
Great. Tamra?
Tamra, Tamra Sattler, SATTLER.com.
Fantastic. And Shana, how about for you?
One way you can find me is my website, shanajamescoaching.com, and Shana is Shana. If you go to shanajamescoaching.com/free, you can get a digital copy of my book, Honest Sex. The subtitle is A Passionate Path to Deepen Connection and Keep Relationships Alive. So it's a lot about mature honesty and how do we communicate with each other and know what we want, and then how do we redefine sex so that we can have more pleasure and more intimacy. A lot of us never learned about that. It's such a private, taboo thing. I also have a quiz. If you go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, it really looks at what's keeping me from having the best love and sex of my life. And I have a podcast that Marc has been on too. A Man Alive is one of them, and Practicing Love is a new podcast I started. So any of those places.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners got a ton out of our first roundtable. And for listeners out there, check out all their stuff. So all their links will be in the show notes. That's the description of the podcast. You'll see the link to the books, to the website, to the quiz, to all the stuff that's been mentioned here. And check us out. So check out menstherapy.online. So if you want to work with Silvan, that's an opportunity to work with him. Yeah, he also runs a divorced dad support group. So if you are a divorced dad listening to this and you want to meet other divorced dads and you want to talk to Silvan, check us out. We also have all kinds of other resources, blogs, some of them that are written by our guests. So if you want to learn more about them, you can check that out, as well as tons of different podcast episodes. So if this is your introduction to the Men's Therapy Podcast, there is a whole world out there. And the best way to see that is to go to menstherapy.online. A ton of free stuff and opportunities to work, help, get the support and connection that you need. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.